Oh no, I'm buried under all this creativity! So, as a creative, your greatest strength, which is your own imagination, your own creativity, can also be your biggest kryptonite. And so, what I'm talking about here is the idea that most people think creative freedom is like a blessing from the gods. And if you have creative freedom, then you're going places. And that's not always the case. And I would say more often than not, it is a curse. As Barry White once said, too much of a good thing is no good for you. And so that's where I'm going here with creativity. So I myself am a victim of this. When given free range to just create whatever I want, it more often than not turns into a disaster. Like, I need other people who are more grounded to be like, hey, let's not have these cats fly to the moon. Let's have, I don't know, dogs do it instead, which that sounds dumb, but that's just the first idea that came to mind. But anyway, it's things and concepts like that I'm trying to captivate here and that I'm trying to capture. A good example of that is Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones. They made the Off the Wall album and the Thriller album together, two of Michael Jackson's greatest albums of all time. Bad, they worked together on Bad. But the big thing that I'm trying to get at here is when they were working together as a pair, they complemented each other really, really well. And then Dangerous comes along, and Michael Jackson kind of gets away from Quincy Jones and that safety net, if you will. And although Dangerous is still a really good album, you can see where his creative freedom kind of goes wild with that album. A lot of those songs have these really long and lavish intros and outros that don't really fit in the grand scheme of the song. I'm fine with cool intros and outros, but one of them, Black and White for example, the song on the album actually has the whole opening scene from the music video on the track. And I was like, I don't want to hear Macaulay Culkin griping at his dad for 20 minutes when I'm trying to listen to Black and White. I just want to hear Black and White. Every song on that album is like that. And so that's the kind of curse that when you have these grand creative visions and you're like, I'm going to do these things, but realistically speaking, it just doesn't work. Sometimes less is more. And without Quincy Jones there to kind of keep him grounded and be like, hey, Mike, this is a cool intro and all, but does this really need to be here? Or this is a nice little outro you've got here. Does this really need to be here? Chances are it doesn't. And so there's that. I've got an example from my own personal life. I was working on, it was a high school video project on Julius Caesar. And we were using Red Dead Redemption as the character actors. It was a little video game movie thing. And so I wrote up the script because I've always been just the writer kind. And so I wrote up this script and I gave it to my partner and he was like, yeah, this is funny, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and this is funny, don't do that. And at the time, I kind of was bugged by it. I was like, oh, he's taking out all this stuff just because he doesn't want to do so much work or whatever. But as it turned out, the project was a huge success. Everybody loved it. I loved it. It's still somewhere on YouTube if you're really courageous and trying to find it. But at any rate, it was excellent. And then the following year, I did the same project, but we were doing Huck Finn instead. And I did not have a partner at that point in time because it was done as an extra credit thing. And my partner that was with me the last year, he wasn't interested in extra credit. He's doing fine in classes, so why do something more? I get that. So I did it all on my own. And I didn't have somebody to rein in all the ideas, and I didn't have somebody to tell me, ooh, let's not do that, or ooh, let's not do this. I had full creative range over this project. And what I created was a 50-minute Huck Finn spoof of the world project, which was just bonkers at the end of the day. Even myself, can go back and watch and be like, wow, that sucked. That was not good. And so I have it from firsthand experience, understanding why it is good to have a fresh pair of eyes on your work and to have someone more grounded kind of keep you to the floor. Because sometimes these excellent creative ideas aren't as excellent and creative as we might think, or maybe they are, but they're still just not good. Another thing to consider is just those overly creative, way blow your mind projects have a very small, minuscule amount of reach. Obviously, if you're just creating to create, then you probably don't care. But if you actually want people to read your stuff or watch your movies or whatever it is you're putting out in the world, which to me is a pretty big thing, like I put it out there so other people can experience it and so it can be a part of other people's lives. And if I create this monstrosity of a creative project that will only appeal to like 3 people in this world, then what's the point? And so that's another thing that people lose track of, is they're like, oh, when I sit down to create my thing, it's going to be this massive creative project where the book reads, you read all the even pages and then you read all the odd pages and have to solve the mystery or whatever, and it only ends up appealing to like so many people because they're like, this is weird. Like the challenge of entry to read your book is very challenging and I'm just not interested in that. A lot of people have a long list of other things to do than to try and interpret your creative magnum opus or whatever it is. And so that's another reason why it's good to have that kind of drawback and be like, hey, you know, I appreciate that you're putting out all this creative stuff, but like if your goal here is to talk to or like reach anyone, you're probably not going to do that. But that's not to say that like for people who create just for the sake of creating, people who put stuff out there just because they want to, there's nothing against that. But like bear in mind the goals of your project. If your goal is for it to be read and for it to be seen by a decent amount of people, then you're going to have to make it appealable to a decent amount of people as well. And then so kind of like wrapping it up here, a good thing to know also is when to stand up for your own creativity. So if you get into like the publishing market, if you get into like any major markets, you will find that people are very quick to try and take control from you. And there becomes a lot of hands in that pot, a lot of people grabbing at what you've made, and a lot of people telling you what you should or should not do. Now, obviously, if you are traditionally publishing, like I aim to do, you can't really say too much to the publisher. Like they're going to say, hey, change this, and you're going to say, darn, I don't want to do that, but I guess I have to if I want to sell this book. But to the same end, even if you're doing it independently, it's always good to get other people's opinions. And that's kind of the whole point of this video, I suppose, is to get the opinions of other people who can keep your work where it needs to be, keep it grounded and in a good place. And that's really the big thing, is what is best for the story that you wish to tell and the story that you wish to create. And so the idea here being, though, is knowing when to stand your ground and when to let things go. And that is a huge piece of advice that could go a million different ways through anyone's life. But in storytelling and in creating, it is a big part of it. Because if you have a character that has to be a certain way, this character has to do these things and has to be this way, otherwise the whole point of the story is null and you have like a numb experience, and someone comes along and they're like, no, that character shouldn't be like that. That character should be straight and narrow and doing the good stuff. And that's when you, as a creator, have to know your vision and have to know what you want out of the story and say, no. No, 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 that does not make sense. That does not work for my story. We're not doing that. But to the same end, to put your foot down on every single change is to basically write something that is not your best work, because change creates better work. And for the most part, not always. Obviously, that's a debatable concept, but I'm not going to say it always is that way. But when you're editing, that's essentially what you're doing, is you're changing your work. And usually, you know you're changing it correctly when the change makes you excited. A lot of times when I go through like 3 or 4 rounds of editing with my books, but when I am excited about a change, that's when I know that the book is moving in the right direction. Because I'm like, oh man, this story is going to be so much better and is going to be told so much more impactfully when I do X, Y, and Z. And that is like 1,000% better than, oh, I'm changing these things because someone told me I had to. Like, if you're doing that, then really triple, double, quadruple check what you're changing. Make sure that it makes sense and that you're not doing it just for the sake of doing it. But if you're excited about a change, you'll know when a change is meant for your story or not. And just be aware of those things and make sure that you're standing up for your work when you need to, and that you're accepting change when you need to. Those are two very, very important things to perfecting your work. Like writing down something, creating something, awesome, possum. But if you're wanting to perfect it, nothing's ever perfect, but make it better and the best that it could possibly be, then those are the things you got to be looking out for. You've got to know, get partnered up with a good person who can keep you grounded. That's kind of idea number one. Partner up with a good person or people or community of people who can objectively look at your work and keep you grounded. Part two of that is going to be having to come to terms with the ideas, and all your creative awesomeness is not going to always fit in one piece of work. Maybe split it up among several, or like pick and choose what works for the work that you're doing. But to just make one project or every project that you have these massive creative extravaganza things isn't always the best way to make your work digestible. And then the third and final point here is going to be knowing when to change and when not to change. When to stick up for your work and when to say, hey, that's not a bad idea.